But there was something missing, and it was the third piece, and it's how do we engage our team in all of this work as well? And I think that's where we came across the work that you and Jane had started in Capstone Leadership Solutions was to improve engagement, improve culture. And so, a light bulb kind of came on that, we could really tag this as a people, process, and plan effort. And so that became what we called our True North effort within the organization.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. This is Sue Tetzlaff, and I am the host of the show. And today I love that I have a guest in the studio, and I love these opportunities to talk to the people that I know are making a difference in an industry that I love and care so much about, which is healthcare, and in particular, rural healthcare. And so Jason Douglas is with me today, and I'm going to start by having him provide a little background of who he is and what he's been up to set some context for our conversation today. So I'll turn it over to you, Jason, to get us started with just a brief introduction.
All right. Well, terrific to be here with you, Sue, and to be able to visit about, again, one of our common passions, rural healthcare. And I will say that my interest and my passion began at a very early age. I started off in my junior and senior years of high school as a CNA for a local long-term care organization. And that's where my passion really drew from, was just the desire to help folks and to make a difference in that way. And so from that, I went on to become a respiratory therapist. That's what I chose as my undergraduate option, and did that for a few years. The reason I got into respiratory therapy is I had fairly severe childhood asthma, and so it was certainly an interest of mine while I was growing up, and was able to carry that through professionally. I would say what really triggered my interest in an administrative career, I started as a cardiopulmonary director at a small hospital in Nebraska, York, Nebraska. And as I was operating the department, I was really curious about how operations and financials get coordinated at a broader level. And so I had a great mentor as a CEO by the name of Chuck Schultz, who really encouraged me to go on and get some additional training in healthcare administration. And so I was able to do that through the University of Minnesota. We actually ended up making a transition to Minnesota. And for the first 3 years, I was a compliance manager for Mercy Unity and United Hospitals here in the Twin Cities at Allina Health. And from there, my administrative career grew. I expressed an interest in operations. I was fortunate to be selected as a CEO for Sibley Medical Center in Arlington, Minnesota. And for another 10 years, operated a hospital in northern Minnesota. And for my most recent 11 years, was a CEO for 2 facilities in northern Wisconsin. So that's a little bit of my past, Sue, but just excited about making a difference, making a contribution to rural health, and making a positive influence on making sure that those hospitals that are independent, locally governed, and have some influence on what services get provided locally, that they can continue to do that and help find strategies to allow them to remain independent. And so that's a little background, Sue.
Yeah. I love your story about what informed your decision about respiratory therapy was your own personal childhood experience with that. My husband is a physician, a DO, and his decision to go into medicine, and in particular the DO route, was because of his own childhood and his struggles with his own spine health, and how a local DO in his community cared for him as a boy, and how that just triggered his interest in wanting to do that for others. And so, it's 40 plus years of life's work now for him to do that. But yeah.
Well, I think too, so many lessons. I know we're going to speak a lot about culture today, but I think back to my days as a CNA, and that's where I really learned about one concept that I know you're teaching is how to consistently introduce ourselves to patients and families. And, I had a terrific director of nursing at that time that really talked to you about how to approach patients and families, which is asking preferred name, getting to eye level, making sure you can address any needs they might have in the room. And so many lessons that we took early on in our career still apply today and are becoming best practice. So sorry to interject that, but I just think there are so many
No.
early on in our lives that carry through to what we do today and making sure that patients feel like they're getting a great experience. So
Yeah, that makes me think of another general surgeon that I knew that started his career as well as a CNA. And I used to love to watch him up on the nursing units, ambulating his patients and the like. And he said, "This is the restorative care I used to do in the nursing home as a CNA and walk my residents and get them moving." And he goes, "Now my general surgery patients need that too." And so, yeah, it was funny.
keep
You
doing it.
just you couldn't take it out of him.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, insert myself into where we met in the last decade is really around your work in your last endeavor as a CEO. And I just absolutely was so impressed with how the work that we were engaged to assist your organizations with, how that was a piece of something that was a bigger part of, a strategy and a puzzle, your oversight and your vision for that and how that came together and the impact that it had is something that, is quite amazing. And so having this opportunity to go into a bit of how strategically the work of growing and improving and having really high performing operations and people, what were some of the main pieces of that? What were some of the maybe lessons that others could learn from?
Absolutely. So I'll provide a little background and context and how we arrived at the model that we did. So many of our practices are ingrained through years and years of work, if you will. So you'll hear the adage, we've always done it that way, and so what really kind of led from a journey to identify a common process improvement method, which we identified lean as kind of the preferred method for our daily improvement efforts. And I was fortunate. I found a 2-day course at another organization in Wisconsin that they were going to be teaching about lean. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. I'll go learn more about how they use it and apply it, et cetera. And before I go any further, I think lean always gets kind of a negative rap because I think coming from the manufacturing world, it's about producing widgets faster. What lean is in healthcare is really about improving the patient experience, but also making the work easier and more efficient for our staff and more enjoyable for our staff. And so that's really the two goals is to not create work faster, but really to make the experience for both better. So during this 2-day learning, obviously we learned a lot about how they apply lean within the organization, which is it's a best practice and it's born out of the Virginia Mason model and has a lot of really good learnings to it. And so we're able to bring that back. But what we learned in the course of those 2 days, they not only apply lean to their process improvement, but they apply lean to how they do strategy as an organization. And so that really got me thinking as I came back from that program and how can we use these two aspects within the organization? But there was something missing, and there was the third piece, and it's how do we engage our team in all of this work as well? And I think that's where we came across the work that you and Jane had started in Capstone Leadership Solutions was to improve engagement, improve culture. And so, a light bulb kind of came on that, we could really tag this as a people, process, and plan effort. And so that became what we called our True North effort within the organization. And just to break those down, plan is really for me about focusing on Porter's teachings in differentiation, meaning how do we do things uniquely so that patients and families want to use us? How do we set ourselves apart from the competition to want to draw them to the services that we provide? When we look at plan, as I mentioned, we centered on lean process improvement as our method for improvement. And we really built out a terrific structure. We had a terrific leader in that area. At any one time, we could have 25 to 30 improvement projects going on. And what really got me, I think, energized about this idea is when you could see staff and physicians pointing to lean process improvement, as a way of solving some of the issues we were facing at the organization. So you knew that when they were thinking about this as a tool to help problem solve, that it had really grounded and really kind of hardwired within the organization. And then lastly, when we think about the people effort, I think, the two things that I think I really took from your and Jane's teachings were, first, how do we develop a consistent set of leadership expectations across the organization? And there are best practices for being good leaders within an organization, things like rounding, things like holding regular department meetings, and how do you hold those department meetings, communication standards. And so we all want to operate. And again, that's long-term in healthcare, is that we've got different levels of expectations and performance across the organization as it relates to leadership. So let's get all on the same page with what leadership looks like and doing that on a daily basis. The second thing, and I think it's the most exciting part for me, is how do we gain insight and information from our staff in important decisions that are facing the organization. And so I think building out the team framework allows employees to have a real voice in things that are affecting the organization and things that we want to improve. And how do we incorporate their ideas into the work that we're doing? And so yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, and some background, kind of how we arrived at what we called a True North effort, but we broke it down into people, process, and plan. And it really became a great model for just helping the organization get better year after year. And so if I'm getting long-winded here, I apologize, but that's kind of in a nutshell how we were able to build those areas out.
Now, I've been to your facilities there many times, and in particular, in one of the last times I had the opportunity to be there in northern Wisconsin to visit, we were actually holding a 2-day leadership summit that was being hosted at one of the facilities there. And we had outside leaders from all around the country there as well, but it was being hosted there, and your staff were able to give a tour to the attendees at the leadership training to actually see, I'm going to call it a command room, but it was your True North room, where on the walls, you've got really an amazing visual kind of display and way to showcase your plans and your progress and your status of people, process, and plan. And so people were just amazed by that, by the way. Like, I loved seeing the reaction of outsiders' faces to go in here and go, wow, this is something. And people were taking pictures. They're like, yeah, we should do this too. So maybe you could describe that room and what was going on there and what people were so excited when they walked in there, what they were seeing.
Sure. So it's great to have these components, if you will, but unless you can manage through them on a regular basis and keep them active within the organization, they just become ideas or a binder that sits on the shelf, et cetera. So for us, every 2 weeks, really what we did was a leadership meeting where we went around the room, as you would call it, to make sure that we were touching base on each of those various components. And I'll kind of walk you around the room if that kind of helps to visualize look on what we called our North Wall. Those were where all of our strategies resided. And so each of our strategies got placed into an A3 document, which is essentially a kind of a fancy plan, do, study, adjust method, if you will. But we would have anywhere from 4 to 5 active strategies at a given time, and we were working through those. But what it allowed you to do in those 2-week intervals then is go to each one of those strategic initiatives and provide an update on what kind of progress we're making, or if it was in the study adjust phase, how are we doing relative to the metrics we set out, and what adjustments, if need to be made to improve in areas we wanted to improve. And so if you will, if you can picture that North Wall, poster size A3s that had this well documented out. I think the other thing that really helped on the North Wall was, because we all have ideas at various times about new initiatives we want to take on. We also had a poster that allowed us to have what we called a wait work board. And this allowed us to kind of park ideas for the future that needed to be vetted, studied further, et cetera. And so that was a really handy tool in terms of thinking about future initiatives we wanted to bring online. So that's North Wall. If we move to the East Wall, that's where we really, and I think a lot of organizations can benefit from this idea, but this is where we really wanted to understand our capacity for taking on new work. So we had big rocks that we had mapped out. And what big rocks are, if you want to compare them to a strategic initiative, they're non-differentiating work. It's work that you got to carry out. So it might be implementing an EHR. It might be doing a building project. It might be, just things that you have to do as part of your normal work, but don't create differentiation or things that are going to draw patients to your organization. We distinguish those two ideas by differentiators, non-differentiators. And so by having those various big rocks mapped out, we could then step back and say, okay, what capacity do we have to take on new work for the organization? Because there's only so much time in a week, a month, a year, et cetera. And so we really were careful not to overburden ourselves with more work than what we could take on at any one given time. And so that was a very helpful practice, just to make sure that we stayed within ourselves, got the work completed on the active stuff that we were working on, and didn't, again, overburden. So that's the east wall. As you got to the south wall, that's where it was really kind of our scorecard. That's where all of our pillars resided. And that's where our goal setting process was. And so if we were doing all components of True North well, our pillars should reflect that we're meeting our goals, we're getting good scores, and we're carrying out obviously the mission and the goals of each of those pillars. And so we spent a lot of time in those categories of quality, patient perspective, employee engagement, how we involve ourselves in community, which was a very important part of what we did. We expected our organization to give back to the community that entrusted us with their care. And then finance. Obviously, finance is always a part of that measurement. As we went to the west wall, that's where we really kind of focused on our people efforts. What were our teams doing? Do we have any leadership trainings we need to be aware of? So that's where all the people discussion really took place. And then we reviewed each of the process improvement initiatives that were going on. And so by having a room like that and having it visual as we did, I think it allowed us to keep these efforts very active and in front of us, rather than in a binder that might get picked up every month or 2 months and reviewed or checked on. So I think the True North, room for us was a really good thing. And again, just a way to keep these efforts alive. I thought it was something unique and special that we were able to come up with. So
I totally agree. And I know that the outsiders that were getting a peek inside of there, they felt the same way, like they were invited into a special place that had special meaning and special information. And, it does remind me of a tactic that we use in all parts of improving an organization's results and achieving its high standards and its goals, is top of mind tactics, right? Is really just, like you said, it's not a binder or a plan that's in, electronic shared drive or just hidden on a shelf in a binder, that it's really in front of us all the time, reminding us of this important work. And just everyone that meets in that room, right, is going to be reminded that we have this going on. You can't really forget it.
Well, Sue, you bring up a great point, because we would hold employee forums in that room. We would hold our medical staff meetings in that room and other forums. And so the beauty of having that, and that's not a locked room, that's an open room. So anybody gets to come in and look at what the current strategies are. Anybody gets to come in and see what the schedule is for Big Rocks, how we're performing relative to our goals on the pillar set, what active process improvement efforts are going on, and what the different teams are doing in the people work. And so that's not just a senior lead room. That's really for everybody to look at, really get an understanding of what's going on within the organization. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's an important piece, is that's a publicly available, visible room to anybody that wants to go in and see what we're working on as an organization.
Yeah. So that transparency as well, top of mind, but also very transparent to anyone who wants to see. It reminds me of, in the organization where I was a senior leader, when we went through our transformation, we didn't have anything like that. I wish we did. That would be something the case method, copy and steal everything. That's something that if I went back, I'd do that, But we had our pillar communication boards in every department. And part of that was for the department's, efforts to keep track of their efforts in their department specifically of improvement. But then they had a section for all of the organization-wide goals and improvements and activities. And those were supposed to be updated all on a regular basis. But I remember one time, the maintenance department, they were 2 floors below us in the same building where administration was. And I would see these maintenance staff people every couple weeks. coming up to administration and standing there in front of our communication board. And I thought, why are they coming here when they have a board in their department? So I said to them, like, you have a board downstairs. There's a reason you're coming up to look at the same information here that should be on your board. And they said, well, ours isn't kept up to date and we want to know. And I thought that was a telltale sign right there. One, we now learned that we've got to make sure that we have accountability for all of the boards being up to date consistently. But it also let me know how interested they were. They would come up 2 flights of stairs, frontline staff, they would come up 2 flights of stairs every 2 weeks and huddle and look at the information because they wanted to know, are we winning? What's going on? What's the game plan?
That's when you know you have a team and you're pulling in the same direction as well, and folks are hungry for information. They want to know what's going on. And I think communication is it's so vital. Maybe to just tell a story. I mean, just to tell you the deep dives that we took on different topics, we always scored very well relative to our employee engagement scores. But one of those indicators for communication was down for a period of time. And so we really looked at message, mode, recipient, kind of what are the 3 parts of communication and how do we make sure that depending upon the message, how high level, broad it needed to be or narrow it needed to be, what was the effective mode? Was it a pillar board? Was it the intranet? Was it a memo? Was it an email? So I think to think through how communication flows through an organization, and this is just one great method, but really being deliberate about that as an organization is so important. And obviously when you study it as well as we did, it really helps you to understand. And it's two-way, right? There's a great example where they wanted the information, they knew where to seek it. And so, the giver, the receiver both have to play a part in making sure that they seek out what's important to them. So the pillar boards are a great example of another communication tool, but they've got to be maintained in order to be effective, right?
Yeah. Just like your room, right? That room, right. It great in concept, but if it's not executed on well, right? And you're not consistent with keeping it up to date, you're not consistent with those walks around the room, then it's all for naught for the most part. So yeah, fabulous. I also was thinking about what's on the other side of this work, like the results that you can get from being really thoughtful and strategic in not only just what your plan is, but in the execution of it. So I was reading one of your articles recently about physician recruiting and how your culture and how I was thinking when you were talking about lean and your early lean initiatives and your ongoing lean initiatives, how you're improving processes for clinicians and for care and other operational things, but in particular, making sure care was great and then your culture, making sure it's great. Those have to be distinctive advantages in physician recruitment. They must.
Well, yeah, so you bring up a great point. I think culture underpins everything that we do as an organization. And what I mean by that is if you have a great culture and people truly enjoy the work and they enjoy working together every day, patients pick up on that. So it affects your patient experience. If your patient experience is strong, obviously your volumes are going to be better. It affects the financial piece of this. And so I think, culture is the underpinning of everything that we do in terms of being successful. So I think it's certainly got to start there. I would even say that, when we were recruiting physicians, the first thing we would talk about was not contracts, numbers, tours, how many ORs or anything like that. We would always begin with a conversation about here's who we are as an organization and here's our culture. Here's how we support and uplift and encourage one another. And that's a really important part of who we're as an organization and still are. Just to give you an example of how effective that can be from a recruiting perspective, we had one orthopedist that he came to do a visit and we started that conversation about culture and who we are, et cetera. And I'm sure a lot of organizations do that. But what was interesting about him and his spouse is they actually came back on an off day to walk through the facility to see if what we were putting on was real. And so it was exciting for me to have them report back that they chose us because of the feel of the organization and the way that people interacted with one another and the positive environment that we created. And so, yeah, whether it's the culture having great effect on engagement, financials, whatever, but I think it has other intangible benefits like recruiting and other things that come out of that. So very much.
Yeah, absolutely. The word finance has come up a few times. And even though this is a podcast about culture, they're so connected, right? We talk about when we elevate people, service, and quality, we can leverage that for growth and financial improvements. And way easier to grow and have better financial outcomes from that growth and that volume. It's way easier to do that when you have a great product, right? You have a great service. You can be a magnet for talent. You can be a magnet for patients. They'll choose you over others, including physicians and surgeons and things
Right.
like that. I know you to be someone that, even though you have this amazing breadth of knowledge and experience in all aspects of planning and improving a healthcare organization, I sense that your financial stewardship is phenomenal. Like finance is like really a strong suit for you. And
I would say that it's become more of an area of interest. And I think particularly as I look at the opportunities that a lot of rural facilities have that they may not be aware of. And it's one of those things that I call probably the most overlooked opportunity in rural healthcare nowadays. It's using the balance sheet more effectively. Several organizations that I've looked at recently have additional financial assets that sit on the balance sheet that really are not earning any interest. And there are opportunities to help support non-operating income by helping to build an investment strategy that ties to mission, ties to their operating needs, and ties to their ongoing capital needs. And I'm not an advisor yet. I'm studying for my Series 65 and
very
obviously want
good.
to provide greater advice on this. So I'm just strictly going to talk to it just from a sense of knowing that those reserves, those assets are available to help improve non-operating performance is one way that hospitals can maybe take a little bit of the pressure off of the challenges related to reimbursement nowadays. As an operator, I spend 99% of my time focused on operation, but the balance sheet is such a key way of helping to alleviate some of the challenges, some of the pressure that rural hospitals are facing nowadays. I just did a little study this week. I looked at about 37 hospitals in Minnesota that have financial assets greater than 5 million. And many of those, many times more than 5 million. And of those facilities, when I looked at the average return, it was about a percent and a half. And so, if you look over the past, 3 years, we've had treasury bill rates of 5+%. I think it's right around 4.5% now. But when you think of the lost opportunity related to those financial assets, if they could have been managed differently and better, I do think there are strategies. Getting an investment plan is not just a one size fits all. I think there are strategies that fit the mission of a rural facility, and that's being value based, it's being conservative, it's preserving capital. It's making sure that when you think about the investment plan, that it ties to the operation, meaning you've got the liquidity needed to be able to meet short-term needs. But as you look at the capital cycle, both on a 1 to 5 year basis and 5 year plus, that you're matching the investment strategy to what the needs are of the organization. And so just don't think of a one size fits all. I need to go out and invest and just do it blindly. I think there are right strategies for an organization, particularly a nonprofit in a small community. But again, not an advisor, but certainly working towards that and want to be able to help hospitals utilize that part of the organization in a better way to help, again, alleviate some of the stress. I always thought of it as if I were thinking of a parallel between, say, an advocacy or a legislative effort, maybe there's something that's going to take $500,000 out of your facility based upon a decision at the legislature. Maybe there's something that's going to add to. We would certainly engage board members. We would engage leaders. We would engage the community to help rally around sending letters and talking to a topic. But here's a freebie. It's sitting there. It's available. We don't have to engage all these folks. We don't have to try to convince legislators as to why it's a good or a bad idea. It's just available to us to use in a use an intelligent way, use in a thoughtful way, but to help take some of that pressure off of rural facilities. So I hope I didn't bounce around too much with that.
No. Every part of that matters. To your point is that we have to be good stewards of our finances. And when it comes to, if we can't get more money in, which, through volumes or reimbursement, then we're challenged with decreasing expenses. And at a certain point, we look at that and go like, where else can we squeeze?
Yeah. No, I think I call it the most overlooked opportunity in rural healthcare.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be able to talk about that. We have partnered with advisors that carry strategies forward that are value-based in nature, conservative in nature. They try to bring down the volatility to keep the board a little more at ease about the up and down of the market, but there are some very responsible ways to put your money to work that can, again, take the stress off the organization financially. So,
yeah. And that's part of that good fiscal stewardship. We want to be great stewards of all of our resources, our people, our equipment, our building, our money. Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm wondering, Jason, if there's anything else you'd like to offer up to our audience of healthcare listeners.
The thing that I would like to express is how much I appreciate the work that you taught me in my time in Northern Wisconsin. You changed my entire perspective about that culture piece and how to bring our team together and how to create a consistent leadership expectation, how to draw from our staff on items that are important to them and incorporate their input on strategies, on things that we're working on for the organization. And so I think of you guys as a best practice all the way around. And anybody that is listening to this, I would encourage you to engage Capstone and Sue and her team in assisting you with your work. It is truly game changing. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Our pleasure, for sure. It is our mission. It is our purpose. And it truly is a partnership. It truly was and is each, organization that we work with. It is a partnership. We can't do it alone. And like I said, we're only one piece of the puzzle. And I love how your puzzle came together so beautifully and how you locked these pieces together and made great change. It's really a legacy move, right? It's something that will serve that organization
on for years, and it's fun to find a model that truly works. And again, it was just once you put it in motion and once you started to see again the team engage in it and become part of that, that's what's really fun. It
is so exciting, isn't it?
But it's an every person thing that's helping to drive that forward. So absolutely.
I always say it is work, right? But it's rewarding. It is work, but it's fun. It's exciting. It's rewarding and impactful. It truly is. And I remember being 10 years as a leader where I was working hard and I cared a lot and I was wanting things to get better and they just weren't, right? Because we hadn't found the right method. We hadn't found the right approach. And I was working hard and long and cared a lot and the metrics weren't moving in the right direction. And so it is nice when you do the work and it's the right work, getting the right results. Well, thank you for all the wonderful shares today on your experience in this area. And we're going to link a lot of your articles that touch on some of the things that you talked about today so people can learn even more. If we could end maybe by you letting people know how to reach out to you, we'll link some of that there. But if there's a way and certain things that maybe you're really focused on helping other healthcare organizations with at this point.
Recently we pulled together a small consulting group that frontierstrategypartners.com. It's easy to find. Phone numbers are linked on there, contact emails, things like that are located there. But, we're trying to find ways to bring the various things that we talked about today into rural healthcare and rural hospitals, just to help perform better. I grew up in a small town of 300. The closest hospital was 11 miles down the road. It's a critical access hospital. I want my parents to have the same access to care that folks in rural Wisconsin, Minnesota, and everywhere else. And so strengthening rural healthcare is a very important thing to me. And so anything that we can do, we list our services on that site as well. Anything that we can do to help with that work, we're happy to do so.
Nice. Well, thank you for your time today. And we're so happy to share some of these tactics with others and inspire them. And also we encourage folks to reach out to see what Frontier might be able to do for them. Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.